Chapter 3. The Freedom Paradox. You left employment to be free. So why do you feel more trapped than ever? Let us go back to the very beginning. Not the beginning of your practice. Further back than that. Back to the beginning of you. From the moment you were born, you were told what to do. As an infant, the rules were simple and non-negotiable. Eat at these times, sleep at these times, behave in this way. As a child, the authority expanded. Teachers, parents, coaches, institutions, all of them shaping your behavior, your choices, your sense of what was acceptable and what was not. Then came university. More structure, more rules, a curriculum that told you what to study, when to sit examinations, and what standard you needed to meet to be considered competent. The healthcare degree is a rigorous one, 3 or 4 years of anatomy, pathology, pharmacology, and clinical practice, and every element of it is defined, assessed, and signed off by someone other than you. And then, having survived all of that, you entered the workforce, where you worked for someone else, in a clinic someone else designed, seeing patients someone else scheduled, using protocols someone else wrote, paid a salary someone else decided was fair. At every stage of your professional life, someone else held the pen, someone else wrote the rules, someone else decided what your time was worth and how you would spend it. And then one day, quietly, or perhaps quite suddenly, you decided enough is enough. Freedom is why you opened your practice. It is the engine beneath every early morning when you unlock the clinic door with a mixture of pride and nervous energy. It is the reason you took on the risk, the debt, the uncertainty, and the relentless hard work of building something from nothing. And freedom is entirely legitimate. Do not let anyone, this book included, suggest otherwise. The desire for professional autonomy is one of the most powerful and healthy motivations a clinician can have. It drives better clinical outcomes, higher patient satisfaction, and a quality of care that is genuinely difficult to replicate in institutional settings where autonomy is constrained. But freedom has a shadow side, and that shadow side is what this chapter is about. Here is the paradox. The very qualities that make a practitioner a compelling private practice owner, independence of mind, clinical confidence, a distaste for being told what to do, a strong sense of personal standards, are the same qualities that make it extraordinarily difficult to build the systems that would set them free. Think about what building a systems-driven practice actually requires. It requires you to document your way of doing things in enough detail that someone else could replicate it without your constant input. It requires you to trust that a process, a written, structured, repeatable process, can deliver outcomes to the standard you would deliver them yourself. It requires you to accept that the business can function without you being personally present in every decision, every interaction, every clinical judgment call. For someone who entered private practice specifically to escape being told what to do, the idea of creating a manual that tells other people what to do can feel deeply counterintuitive. This is the freedom paradox. The freedom you sought through private practice can only be fully realized by building a system that runs without you. Nobody does it like I do. This is perhaps the most common expression of the freedom paradox, and it is one that every practitioner reading this will recognize in themselves to some degree. You have spent years developing your clinical skills, your assessment technique, your treatment methodology, your approach to complex cases, your way of putting an anxious patient at ease in the first 5 minutes of an appointment. These are the product of thousands of hours of practice, reflection, and refinement. They are genuinely yours, and they are genuinely excellent. So when you consider writing a protocol that another practitioner could follow, something resists. What you do is nuanced. It is contextual. It cannot be reduced to a checklist. The moment you try to systematize it, you risk flattening the very thing that makes your clinical care exceptional. This belief is understandable, and it contains a kernel of truth. Clinical judgment is not fully systematizable. The nuanced decision-making of an experienced practitioner cannot be entirely captured in a document. But here is what the belief gets wrong. The goal of systems is not to replace clinical judgment. It is to free clinical judgment from the administrative, operational, and logistical noise that currently consumes so much of your energy. A system for patient onboarding does not replace your diagnostic skill. A protocol for staff communication does not reduce your clinical autonomy. They create the conditions in which your best clinical work can happen more consistently, not less. I do not have time to build systems. This one is partly true and entirely circular. You do not have time to build systems because you are trapped in the treat, sleep, repeat cycle. You are trapped in the treat, sleep, repeat cycle because you have not built systems. The systems would create time, but creating the systems requires time you do not currently have. This circular logic is one of the most paralyzing features of the freedom paradox. It is not laziness, it is not a lack of ambition, it is a genuine structural problem that the chaos control system is specifically designed to solve. 1 hour per week. That is all it asks. Because 1 hour per week, sustained over 12 months, compounds into something genuinely transformative. We will come to that. For now, it is important simply to name the belief for what it is, a rationalization that protects the status quo, even when the status quo is making you miserable. My patients come to see me. For many established practitioners, this is simply true. Patients have been coming to see you, more specifically, for years. They trust you. They refer their family members to you. They would not dream of seeing anyone else at the practice. You are, in the most literal sense, the practice. And therein lies the problem. A practice in which every patient relationship is entirely personal to the owner is a practice that cannot function without the owner. It cannot be scaled, it cannot be delegated, it cannot generate revenue while the owner is on holiday or recovering from illness or simply trying to take a Saturday afternoon off without their phone ringing. More significantly, it cannot be sold. The capital value of a practice that is entirely dependent on a single clinician is dramatically lower than one with documented systems, a strong team, and a business that demonstrably runs without its founder. If you ever intend to exit your practice, whether through sale, succession, or retirement, the degree to which it depends personally on you is the single greatest determinant of what it is worth. The belief that your patients come to see you is, paradoxically, one of the strongest arguments for building systems, because only by building a practice that can function beyond you will you ever be able to leave it on your own terms. Systems feel like giving up control. This is perhaps the deepest expression of the freedom paradox, and the one that requires the most careful examination. For someone who entered private practice to gain control, the idea of writing down how things should be done and then trusting others to do them can feel like surrendering the very thing they fought to achieve. What if the associate does not do it right? What if the protocol does not capture the nuance? What if the system produces mediocre outcomes that damage the reputation you have spent years building? These fears are real, but they rest on a false premise, that control and systems are in opposition. In fact, the opposite is true. A practice without documented systems is not under your control. It is under the control of chaos. Every day, outcomes depend on whoever happens to be in the building, whatever mood they are in, whatever they happen to remember about how things should be done. That is not control. That is hope dressed up as management. A well-built systems-driven practice, by contrast, gives you more control than you have ever had. You know exactly how patients are greeted, how appointments are managed, how clinical outcomes are measured, how complaints are handled, and how your team is developed. You have created the conditions for excellence, and then you can step back, knowing that the conditions hold whether you are there or not. That is not giving up control. That is what real control actually looks like. Why 90% never break through. I have been working with podiatrists and allied health practice owners for long enough to know this with some certainty. Approximately 90% of the practice owners who understand the freedom paradox intellectually never do anything about it. They read the book, attend the workshop, nod along to the concept, and then return to their clinic on Monday morning and resume the treat, sleep, repeat cycle as though nothing happened. This is not stupidity. These are intelligent, highly trained, deeply motivated professionals. The problem is not comprehension. The problem is that understanding a concept and changing the structural conditions of your working life are two entirely different things, and the structural conditions conspire against change. The full clinical diary means there is always something more urgent than system building. The exhaustion of the tipping point means that an extra hour of focused, strategic work feels genuinely impossible. The freedom paradox means that even when the time is found, the psychological resistance to building systems can be overwhelming. And so the 90% stay stuck, not because they lack the intelligence to see the solution, but because the combination of structural pressure and psychological resistance is, without a clear framework and a genuine commitment, enough to defeat most people. I say this not to discourage you, I say it to be honest, because the 10% who do break through are not extraordinary people with superhuman discipline. They are practice owners who understood the stakes clearly enough, the cost of staying stuck, the value of what they stood to gain, and made a decision. A simple, specific, actionable decision. 1 hour per week. Committed to. Week after week. Month after month. For as long as it takes. Before we leave the freedom paradox behind and move into solutions, it is worth pausing to acknowledge something. The qualities that created the paradox, your independence, your high standards, your deep investment in your clinical work and your patience, are also the qualities that make you capable of building something truly excellent. Your freedom is not the enemy, it is the engine. The goal is not to suppress it, but to redirect it, from being present in every interaction and decision to being embedded in the systems and culture of a practice that reflects your values and standards at every touch point, whether you are there or not. That is a worthy ambition. It is also a deeply satisfying one. The practitioner who has built a practice that runs to their standard without requiring their constant presence has not given up control. They have achieved the highest form of it. They have built something that lasts beyond them, something that serves patients, employs people, and generates value long after the founder has chosen to step back, slow down, or simply take a proper holiday for the first time in years. That is what freedom, real freedom, actually looks like, and it is entirely within your reach. Coming up in Chapter 3, we introduce the third cog, the gearing system that sits between you and your business, allowing the machine to run without grinding the motor into the ground. The franchise model, the operations manual, and the 1 hour per week framework that makes it all possible. To be the first to know when the next chapter is released, subscribe to our YouTube channel or newsletter at practiceautopilot.co.uk. Thank you for listening.